be helpful if that door was closed as far as possible. I know sometimes people keep walking in, so that we don't get noise from outside, people outside don't get disturbed by us. Very good morning to all of you. Thank you very much for coming, and particularly thank you for coming on time. This should go without saying, but it is something which I think needs to be recognized. We should actually have advertised this entire event as starting at 10:15, in the hope that there was some possibility of everybody being here by 10:30, but we are not, fortunately, in that position. Sorry, there is a real problem with the positioning of the mic. I was talking to you yesterday about the law of defamation, and what I attempted to do yesterday was to lay the ground for today's discussion. I was telling you about the essentials of defamation. What is defamation? What are the basic principles on the basis of which the law of defamation works? What is the state of the law, etc., etc. What I intend to do today is to continue that discussion and to talk about defenses that are available to a person who is facing a defamation suit. I will also, as part of our discussion today, deal with a number of cases. Some of them English, some of them Indian. So that is the agenda for the day, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to complete this topic by 12:30. Okay, and then we'll start a new topic tomorrow. So I was at the point where I was telling you about the fact that public bodies cannot sue for defamation. I need to actually clarify one point here, which was raised towards the end of my lecture yesterday, just as we were closing, and because there was a little bit of a pressure to wind up, I did not elaborate on this point. And the issue is this. Quite rightly, one of you asked me about political parties. Now, I have to say that there is a divergence between English law and Indian law here. What I have said there on the slide is true of this case, the Dabishar case. In other words, that is a position which applies in the UK. But it is not the position applying in India, because the Indian case which adopted this principle, which is a case called R. Rajgopal. Now in that case, the court did not include political parties. So the position, as I understand it, is that in India, political parties can sue for defamation, whereas in the UK they cannot. So there's a slight difference there. And in UK there is case law to show that political parties cannot sue for defamation. If you're interested, the name of the case is Goldsmith against Poirot. So that's the position as far as political parties is concerned. But in any case, the general principle which I was talking about, namely that government bodies and government agencies cannot sue for defamation, continues, and that position is equally applicable in England as in India. In terms of unincorporated bodies, that is to say bodies which are like an association and not a corporation, then they cannot sue or be sued because they do not possess a legal personality. And this is worth noting because if you had, for example, a club, an unincorporated club, then that club cannot sue in its own name. Though of course, members of the club can sue, but the club itself cannot sue in its own name. And trade unions and partnerships can sue and be sued in their own name, which is the point I made earlier. And trade unions do sue, at least in England, yes.
Does this include the NGOs when you are talking of unincorporated associations?
Correct, as long as the NGO is not incorporated. Some NGOs actually are quite smart and they register themselves both as a charity and as a company. When that happens, of course they are incorporated. But most of them don't. They're just unincorporated associations. Yes.
So I believe you understand that in India, the clubs and societies, they are registered under the State Societies Registration Act. So that's a form of incorporation. The modern trend is to incorporate them as zero profit companies. That's a different issue. But I believe the societies, like as you mentioned, the clubs and associations, registered under State Societies Registration Act, are able to sue and be sued. I don't know,
I would be a little hesitant to answer that question in the affirmative, because incorporation technically means incorporation is a company, legal personality. I do not think registration under the Societies Act confers the status of legal personality. I do not think so. I'm not an expert on Indian law, so it is possible I'm missing something, but my understanding, Shami can come in and tell me, my understanding is that that kind of registration is not enough to confer legal personality of the sort that is required under the law of defamation.
So partnerships are also not, like we do not have separate legal identities. Not in these two, whereas other incorporated associations are not.
I'll tell you why, because even in India you have the concept of LLPs who do have personality. Okay? Right, let's move on. Now, what are the defenses to a defamation action? So we are in a sense coming to part 2 of the topic of defamation. This is very important because it is not the case that simply because somebody threatens to sue you for defamation, you should hold your hands up and say, I give in. You don't have to. Because you do have defenses. You can defend yourself and in many cases win. In other words, the case can be defeated. Because remember, a lot of people try it on in the hope that they can intimidate somebody who either writes or is about to write something unpleasant about them or unsavory about them. So what are the defenses? The first defense is called justification. Now, a simpler word for that is truth. So what is happening here is that the person who has been threatened with a lawsuit says, I will prove that what I have said is true. And that, as you can imagine, is a very potent defense. Because if what you're saying is true, and if you can prove that what you're saying is true, then there is no basis for the other person to complain. So truth is a defense. And the requirement for this defense is that the words complained of must be shown to be true or substantially true. That's important because sometimes you may not be able to prove the allegations or prove the truth of the allegations 100%. But you are able to show that the allegations are substantially true. When that happens, the court will accept your plea. And it will be based, obviously, on clear and cogent evidence. Very important. You can't simply say, I believe this to be true, therefore it is true. Or many people believe this to be true, therefore it is true. No. For you to win, you have to show very clear evidence to the satisfaction of the court. This is very important. So when you do that, then you will be seen as succeeding in your defense of justification. And of course, the standard of proof is balance of probabilities. In other words, it is more probable that what you are asserting is the case than otherwise. That is the balance of probabilities test, which is a common test for civil law. In criminal law, the standard of proof is different, and that is beyond reasonable doubt. You don't have to prove your case in a civil suit beyond reasonable doubt. You just have to show on the balance of probabilities that what you say is true. And when a person making the statement relies on a report or a rumor, it's not enough for him to cite the report or the rumor, which we already discussed. You can't simply say X said something and I simply repeated it. That's not enough. You have to prove the truth of what you have repeated. So it's quite an onerous task. And truth can be pleaded for the whole of a statement or for only part of it. So suppose you're writing an article which has many allegations against somebody, and you are in the position of proving some of those allegations but not all. It happens sometimes because you may not have proof for a few of the allegations you're making. That's all right. As long as you can prove some of the allegations, you will win on those allegations. So if it turns out you're making 5 allegations and you can prove 4 of those but not the 5th, you will still be in a better position than if you did not prove any of the allegations. The amount of damages awarded would be much lower than if you did not prove the truth of all the allegations. And again, the court will have regard to the gravity of the allegations. So, to take an extreme example, suppose you say in your article that X is a war criminal. X also has not paid his television license fee. Okay, maybe that's not a good example here because I don't think you have television license fees to be paid. Okay, X did not pay, X repeatedly fails to pay his water tax. Okay, 2 allegations. One of which is a war criminal and the other is that doesn't pay his water bills. Now, if you can prove that he's a war criminal, which is a very difficult thing to prove, but you cannot prove that he does not pay his water bills, then quite frankly, you won the case. Because by comparison to that big allegation, this other thing is very trivial. But if it was the opposite, you can be sure you'll be mulcted because you are not able to prove something really grave, but you're proving something trivial. So there's that aspect also to be taken into account. But generally speaking, it is possible for a person to sometimes say, I can't prove everything I've said, but I'll prove what I have evidence for. So that's a possibility. And truth can, it's always a good idea for journalists to secure strong evidence before publication. It's a point I made earlier. Don't rely on your source giving you their evidence after you publish, because if they're not able to give it to you, you had it.
So would you mind putting it in full screen, sir? There is a possibility of doing it.
Yes, of course.
Sorry.
So, those are the basic rules concerning truth. Now, the second defense is fair comment. Shamik, for some reason, there is a variation. At times it doesn't pick up. So there's something.
Yeah, the direction has to be towards your mouth, sir.
I've done that, and what then happens is it booms. I don't want you to actually.
You have to put it a little far away from your mouth.
Well, in which case you don't get anything. There you are. Okay. So I try to keep it at an optimum distance, but it doesn't work. And there's a risk that those of you who are sleeping will be suddenly woken up if I keep it too close to my mouth. Okay. So I don't know what to do. Just see if the technician can do something about it. All right. Okay. Fair comment. Fair comment is a very useful defense for journalists. And when you're using this defense, you plead that the alleged defamatory statement is an opinion based on true facts, which any reasonable person will hold in relation to matter of interest. So, see what's happening here is comment, not a statement of fact. Very important to remember. The allegation you're making is a comment. Comment means opinion. And opinions generally cannot be proved, because your opinion may be that X is a crook, whereas somebody else's opinion may be that X is a social worker. Okay, you remember what happened in the case of the chap who was jailed 2 days ago in Haryana. There were many people who argued that that man was a social worker, is a great man, messenger of God, etc., etc. But there were an equal number, if not more, who believed that he was a charlatan. So, it's a question of opinion. Now, there are certain circumstances under which the law allows journalists to express their opinions, even if those opinions are seen to be defamatory. It's a very, very useful defense to all of you. So what really happens, sorry, I think I'll have to wait till we get some help because we're getting nowhere. I'm very sorry about this, but there we are. I was hoping this mic would be better than that, but technology is failing us.
It works only in case of fair comment.
Okay, this seems to be actually working now, but I don't want to be too optimistic. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, I hope it continues. Let's hope it great. Okay, now, fair comment, as I said, is something which obviously is very helpful to journalists because in the course of your work, you don't always make statements of fact in your writing. You also express opinions. And therefore, this defense would be very useful. And I've given an example there of a statement which is that A is a disgrace to the medical profession. Now that is your comment. That is your comment. A is a disgrace to the medical profession. But that comment has to be based on something that is substantial. You can't just pluck something out of the air and say, I think X is a crook. You have to have some basis to say that. And the basis here is, he is known to sell confidential information relating to his patients. So, if you have a finding, for example, the Medical Council of West Bengal, that a doctor has been charged with selling confidential information about his patients, then you can say, on the basis of that statement, that the doctor is a disgrace to the medical profession. He may not like it, it may be defamatory, it may bring down his reputation in the eyes of third parties. So it satisfies the test of defamation. But it will still be excused by the law because it is fair comment on a matter of public interest. Very important, because what you're saying must also be in the public interest. You cannot say these things, for example, in relation to a person's private life. That will not be covered by fair comment. It has to be on a matter of public interest. Of course, there are some borderline cases where whether something is in the public interest or not will be debatable. But even so, generally speaking, the principle is easy to apply. So, if you are using fair comment, you have to be sure about the fact on the basis of which you are making the comment. Yeah.
So, what would be the justification of something like this? Given that, I mean, if there is a fictitious charge created, there's always a presumption of innocence in our criminal justice system. So, then if a fair comment says something in the lines of drawing an inference from just a charge, I mean, what is the justification behind that not amount of defamation?
Justification behind allowing fair comment?
As in a fair comment says that you've been charged with a crime but not yet convicted,
Yeah.
I can still pass character aspersions.
Yes.
Why would that not be defamation? I mean, what is the justification?
For the simple reason that if the subject matter of what you're commenting on is a matter of public interest, then it will also depend, of course, on what you say. So, before the conviction happens or before the result of the trial is known, you will be slightly more circumspect than you would if the result of the trial is known. So, you could, for example, say, X appears to be a crooked man. And that's also defamatory. But that is different from saying X is a crooked man. You know what I mean? So, you need to calibrate your comment to the context. If the context is that somebody is still facing trial, is being charged, has been charged and is facing trial, then obviously you cannot be definitive about the result. So it is contextual and you'll have to be a little more nuanced in how you say it. Okay? Alright? So fair comment is very important. Now fair comment is useful in the case of reviews. You know that you may review a film or a book. So when you do that, you will sometimes make comments which the author of the book or the producer of the movie may not like. They may think it's defamatory. But you still have the leeway to say what you want to say. Why? Because you are commenting on that work. It may be a book, it may be a movie, whatever. And that person has actually put forward that work for public comment. When you make a movie, you expect people to comment on the movie. And in those circumstances, you can't suddenly become very sensitive and say, sorry, but you said something disparaging about my movie. That's not allowed. So, reviews do attract the defense of fair comment. But of course, a journalist should not mix up facts with comments. This is a danger which you should avoid. A lot of the time, if you're not careful about this, you run the risk of falling foul of the rules, because the court might say, you've not been careful enough to indicate what is comment and what is fact. If you don't do that, then of course, there is a problem. And the defense of fair comment would be vitiated the analysis. Now, this is very, very important. What does it mean? It means many things. For example, if you bear a grudge against somebody, let's say you bear a grudge against the maker of a movie, you had a fight with him previously, and you want to take revenge, you want to be vindictive towards that person, and the best opportunity for you is when the person produces a new movie. So you say, you know what, I'm going to review this movie. So you write a review, a hatchet job on the movie. Now, if you do that, then there is a fair chance that your defense, if a defamation case is filed, or fair comment may not work, because the other person may be able to show that you wrote what you wrote because of your predisposition towards hatred for the fellow. And in those circumstances, the defense will be defeated. So you need to be very, very careful that you don't do anything maliciously. And there is this concept of legal malice which needs to be put in mind, which also includes, incidentally, over-the-top language. So you can say what you want to say, you can criticize somebody, but you don't have to use sensational language in which to do it. So if you write your review in sober language, sometimes you can be more effective criticizing somebody in sober language than if you use extravagant language. So that's important as well. Also, the provenance you give to the article, all that is very important. If I had the time, what I would have done is to give you a piece of group work in which this can be teased out more, but we sadly do not have the time. I have the case studies for the group work, but I cannot unfortunately give it out because we just don't have the time. But do remember the principles, and if later you want to ask me after the class, I'm very happy to talk about this. Yeah.
So my question is, I mean, for keeping criminal laws aside, when we're dealing with someone like a public personality, someone in public office, does the threshold change? Because, like, where do you draw the line between just commenting on them as an individual as compared to defaming? So I'll give you an example. Let's say I get up and say something like the finance minister has no knowledge of banking law, because I believe that his policies are not. Now, is that a comment on his reputation or his reputation as an economist, or is that just a fair comment or a fair criticism of my finance?
I would quite easily be able to justify that comment or defend that comment on the basis of the defense of fair comment if I backed up my comment with some statement of fact. For example, if you were to show that the finance minister's policies have been disastrous, then that comment would be entirely fair. Or if you had a situation where the finance minister about whom you're talking was unable to answer questions at a press conference, that shows that he's out of his depth as an economist, and therefore your comment will be justified. So again, it's a matter of context. Okay? Right, if there's nothing else, let's move forward. There is also the defense of absolute privilege, with which I am sure you're all familiar. And absolute privilege means an occasion when the law gives total freedom of expression. Now, I told you that there is no such thing as absolute freedom, but this is one of those rare exceptions in a limited way. Where you can say what you like about somebody, you will still not be held liable for defamation only. Defamation only. And how does it work? It works, for example, in the case of speeches made on the floor of Parliament. If an MP were to say some very nasty things, some very defamatory things about another person who is not in the house, and that other person considers it to be so damaging of his reputation that he wants to sue, he will not be allowed to sue. Why? Because the law allows for complete freedom to say certain things on the floor of Parliament. Remember, this has to be in Parliament. It is not applicable when the statement is made outside Parliament. Now, sorry, go ahead, okay.
Sir, if it is unparliamentary, obviously it will be expired.
That's a different matter. That is for the speaker to do, not for the court. That is for the speaker. It is also true that an MP cannot stand up in Parliament and say what he likes, because he has to be subject to the discipline of Parliament. So if Parliament is discussing a particular topic, he has to stick to that topic. He can't then say X is a murderer, unrelated to what is being discussed. So that is all understood. But there is still a lot of room for MPs to bring in what they want to bring in if they are creative. Okay? Now, how does this help journalists? Can you think of why this is helpful to journalists? And don't tell me this is helpful to journalists if the journalist also happens to be an MP. Forget it. I'm talking about a journalist who is not an MP. How does it help?
Because what has been discussed and recorded in Parliament, you are supposed to report. And for that, even if the claimant considers it to be defamatory, he cannot sue because it has been accepted and recorded in Parliament. Otherwise, there will be a breach of privilege of Parliament.
Absolutely right. What happens is you have a different rule, which I'm going to talk about later on, under which it is entirely legal for any journalist to report what happens in Parliament, to provide what is called an accurate and fair report of what is said in Parliament. Now, as a result, if an MP says something defamatory and you report it, you are not liable for that statement under the law of defamation. This is a very big advantage to journalists because the normal rule, as I told you, is you can't repeat something saying someone said this, I'm simply reproducing it. But in the case of parliamentary statements, that principle does not apply. Now, how can you use this to your benefit? You can use this to your benefit in this way. If there is a topic on which you are nervous about writing something because you feel that you are likely to be sued for defamation, what you can do is get hold of a friendly MP.
Yes.
And if the friendly MP is willing to raise this issue in Parliament, he raises it on your behalf. He doesn't say I'm doing it for so and so, but he raises it as if it's a matter of interest to Parliament. And you then reproduce what he says, which you could not have said yourself, because if you say it outside Parliament, then of course you'll be liable to be sued for defamation. So it's a very, very useful tool. Sorry?
Even the MP cannot say the same thing outside the Parliament.
Of course not.
Within the Parliament.
Of course.
So we
So-
are benefited indirectly through parliamentary.
Yes. So that's the way which you can sometimes use this defense to your advantage. There is a downside to this. What is that? If you said what I have just said, if you did what I just said, of course you get the chance to expose somebody without being liable for defamation. But there is a downside. What is that?
Even others get a chance. Other journalists get a chance. Counter narratives will come.
In other words, you will lose exclusivity. So you cannot claim this to be an exclusive story because everybody else can report just as you can. Okay, but it's still a useful tool for journalists.
So what happens when this is said outside Parliament? I'll give you an example. When Pranab Mukherjee was president, that time he is also a former finance minister. So there was a little bit of case between him and P. Chidambaram about India's GDP growth over certain years. Chidambaram said when no one mentioned the other's name but cited figures like this was the time when the GDP figures were low. So Pranab Mukherjee had come to Calcutta for a program of Bengal National Chamber of Commerce, where he retorted what Chidambaram said, again not by naming him and citing figures. These are the years when the GDP growth was high. So all of us understood this was a reply to what Chidambaram said, but we were not sure whether the president saying this can be reported. Because at the beginning of his speech, he said that I'm the head of the country, but the constitution doesn't empower me to comment on the working of the government. What happened is, when he left, the press secretary asked the journalist to stay back, and then he came and said that the president wants this to be reported. Okay. So we were still not sure because, as you said, there is no concrete proof. It's the press secretary just comes and says you can report this. So what happens in such a situation?
I cannot see a problem with defamation at all in that situation. What is defamatory? Or what do you think is defamatory?
I'm saying whether, because we were in a dilemma since he himself said that I'm head of the country, but the constitution doesn't empower me to comment on the workings of the government. Then he was actually commenting on the working of the government against the finance minister without naming him. So we were in a dilemma whether we can report this or not.
You would be in a dilemma not for reasons of defamation, but for a completely different reason. That is, I assume that what you were told by the secretary to the president was that what the president is going to say is off the record. Am I right?
Yes, yes, yes. You are right.
Or did the secretary say go ahead and publish?
He said the president wants this.
One minute. Listen to one minute. I'll come to you. Yeah.
He said the president wants this to be reported.
Right.
But this is a public program where you say everything on the dais.
Yeah.
How can we say that?
I cannot see any problem there at all. You tell me what is the law that is breached, or what do you think is the law that is breached? He's not saying anything despite, he's not defaming anybody. At the most you can say he's correcting an impression that has been wrongly put out. That's all. There's nothing wrong with that. Sorry. 1 minute before I come to you, there are a couple of people on that side who wanted to speak. Done? Okay, alright.
So just to follow up on Sir's question there, I mean, moving a little outside the ambit of definition. So when there is such a dilemma, right? So in that situation, especially when the constitution of the country specifically says that the president isn't empowered to comment on the workings of the government and the president actively makes open remarks, then in that circumstance, how exactly will a journalist report it, or what do you think are the potential ramifications that can arise from reporting such information?
Okay, for a start, you are not right in saying the Constitution expressly says that the President cannot comment on matters concerning the government. There is no such provision at all.
It's a convention like actually.
Well, convention up to a point. Up to a point. Okay? The President has every right to comment on matters of government. Obviously, he will have to show discretion. And secondly, but to answer your question, you asked an important question. Forget this example, because this example is not a good example, where he has simply said something innocuous. But suppose he says something explosive, right? That does put the journalist in a dilemma. Do you report it or not? And there I would suggest two things. One is that there is a law called breach of confidence, which will apply, which I will talk about later on when I talk about privacy. Okay? And I'll explain how it works. But more to the point, there is also the issue of ethics. I keep coming back to ethics all the time, although I'm not lecturing on ethics at the moment. And that is about, do you keep certain information confidential in circumstances where there is an expectation of confidence, or if your source has told you, do not say this or do not highlight this. So there are a number of other issues which are not relevant to the topic of defamation. So that's the reason why I'm reluctant to go into that at this stage. I'm very happy to deal with this example under a different topic, and you're very welcome to raise it. Please do raise it if you remember and if I don't. Okay? Yeah.
So the example what my friend has said is just quoting statistics, nothing else. I mean, President in his official speech recorded, made certain statistics pronounced, and then there is no problem. I mean, we could have written that while a couple of weeks before in Parliament or outside Parliament, the finance minister is giving such statistics, while President's speech, the statistics are different.
That is the point I was trying to make earlier, that the information in this case is so innocuous that there cannot be any issue. But again, I don't want to stray too much beyond the topic, but I will give you an example where you had a really explosive situation. You remember a few years ago, a couple of decades ago, Zair Singh, when he was president, was embroiled in a very big scandal or controversy where it was shown that one of the things he wrote as president was a letter composed by certain opponents of Rajiv Gandhi, and he was in collusion with particularly a journalist, a very senior journalist called Mulgaonkar of the Indian Express. Now that raises very serious issues. If you were a journalist reporting on that, there is a very serious issue. I do not have the time to go into it. I'm very sorry to disappoint you, but if you have a chance to talk outside the class, I'll be very happy to. So very quickly, do you want to make a point?
In the history GST related to impact the parliament, the President Pranab Mukherjee clearly claimed the credit of GST, bringing GST by him in the first time. So there are so many occasions that President speech and position before the government.
Yeah.
When the Arun Jaitley clearly claimed the NDA credit, the President just speech was just
okay. Again, it's neither here nor there. There is no legal issue involved in this at all. Okay, let's move on. Qualified privilege. This is slightly more tricky. It is a very useful defense for journalists. What it means is that the defendant pleads that the alleged defamatory words were uttered in circumstances where he had a legitimate duty or interest in reproducing those statements or making those statements, and the recipients had a legitimate interest in receiving them. Now, a typical example of qualified privilege would be, outside journalistic context, is, you know that when people apply for jobs, they are often asked to give references. So the prospective employer will say, we want to take a reference from your professor in the college in which you studied. And we are going to write to the professor asking the professor's opinion of you. Is this person reliable? Is this person bright? Is this person trustworthy? Etc. etc. Now, when that request comes, the professor has a lot of liberty, freedom, to write a reference in which he may write things which may be considered by the candidate to be defamatory. But he will still be excused. Why? Because he has a duty of frankness to the other person, and the other person has a duty to receive frank opinion. Now that principle has been extended into journalism. This is a very complex area of the law which I wish I had more time to explain, but I'll tell you briefly what it is. Suppose there is a matter of public interest, and it needs to be covered, but the journalist concerned does not have 100% proof. Most of the time, these are big scandals. For example, an arms deal, a defense deal kind of scandal. You may not have all the information that will allow you to plead justification as a defense if somebody sued you. But it is still a matter of great public interest, so that you have a duty to inform your readers or your listeners or your viewers. Equally, your readers, listeners have an interest in learning about this information. Now, in those circumstances, the law allows you a certain amount of freedom to write about such things, even if there's a risk of a defamation case. Now, this particular topic is quite complex, and there are a number of very strict rules which need to be followed before you can use this defense. Otherwise, everybody will use this defense. So it's not allowed. And I'll explain to you as much as I can what those conditions are. So essentially, this concept is based on a duty and an interest. So there's a reciprocal arrangement in such circumstances. So this concept of qualified privilege was extended to media publications. In this case, Reynolds and Times newspapers. The Reynolds case is very important. Now, oddly enough, although the Reynolds case started in England, the Reynolds case has now been superseded in England expressly by an Act of Parliament. The Act says from now on the Reynolds principle does not apply. And yet, I suggest it would apply to India, because India still goes by common law, not by British statute law. And I'll show you, I've given it there. I think least a couple of cases where the Reynolds defense has been referred to by Indian judges. Unfortunately, the treatment of the Reynolds case by the Indian judges in those cases has not been entirely satisfactory. They could have done a better job. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. The fact remains that the Reynolds principle will, I think, be useful to journalists in India should a situation arise where there is some difficulty in defending a piece of investigative journalism. So for that reason, it is a principle worth noting. What it means essentially is that there is a moral duty on the part of the media to comment on matters of public interest, even if the comment is defamatory, and also a legitimate interest on the part of the public in receiving such information. So for example, if you had a scandal like the Gopher scandal, now that is a subject about which it can be said that the public have a legitimate interest in receiving the information. Equally, the media have a duty to provide that information. So that's how it proceeds. And of course, the most important thing about using this defense is that the plaintiff should have acted reasonably and responsibly. So, in terms of acting reasonably, that standard is to be borne in mind. And as I said, these are a couple of cases where the Reynolds defense has been referred to in India. Now, what are the factors that need to be taken into account when you talk about the Reynolds defense? I'm just going to go through this very, very quickly, because if I were to stay on each of the points for any length of time, you'd be missing out on a number of other things. The seriousness of the allegation. The more serious the allegation, the higher the moral duty on the part of the media. The nature of the information and the extent to which the subject matter is a matter of public concern. Is the matter of public concern? Very, very important. If it is a matter of public concern, you have a higher duty to inform the public. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but I'll say it now, I'll repeat it in a different context and explain it at length. The concept of public interest is very, very important, as I've always told you. You remember one principle. Simply because something is interesting to the public does not make it a matter of public interest. Very, very important number. Because, for example, sex scandals are very interesting to the public, but are they of public interest? Not necessarily. So, simply because something is interesting to the public does not make it a matter of public interest. But matters of public concern are matters which give the media some leeway when it comes to defamation. Also, the source of the information. When you are thinking of publishing something along the lines that we discussed, then you have to ask the question, what is the source of the information? How credible is the source? Is it a good source? Is it a reliable source? Is it a respectable source? Because if you got information from a dubious source, it will be very difficult for you to win a case on the basis of qualified privilege, on the basis of the Reynolds principle. Also, steps taken to verify the story. Again, very important. So if you get a story, you don't simply lap it up and publish. Did you take any steps to verify the story? Okay, it may be difficult to verify, but that does not mean you should not take at least the basic steps to verify the story. That's very important as well. The status of the information. Is this information that you've got already in the public domain? What is happening to the information? Is it an evolving story? Those sort of things will also have to be taken into account. The urgency of the matter. Is there any urgency to publish this information immediately, or can we wait and do further research before we publish the information? Again, quite important. Whether comment was sought from the plaintiff. Now, the point here is, you get a story, for example, saying that a particular politician is involved in a scandal. Did you at least make an effort to get a comment from that person? Now, it is possible, in fact, it is likely that you may not get a comment, because the fellow whom you are accusing of something is not likely to cooperate. But at least you should have made an effort to see if he has got some comment to make. Whether the article contained the gist of the plaintiff's side of the story. In other words, even if you don't get a comment from the person about whom you're writing, at least you should make an effort to indicate to the reader what likely points that person would have made, or what are the points in his favor. Even if you disagree with that, you can say this is what he might say, but it's rubbish. That's fine. But at least you give the reader an indication of what the other side might have to say. The tone of the article, very important. You should never write any such article in a sensationalist tone. You should ideally write it in a sober language, sober tone, sober language, and that will aid your use of this defense. And the circumstances of the publication, including the timing. Are you being opportunistic by publishing the article at a time where questions can be raised about your judgment? Very important. You need to be careful that you don't sound dishonest in the way that you are trying to publish this article. So quite a few factors, and quite frankly, each of these factors can be discussed at great length. I just gave you a gist of what it is all about. Now, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to skip many of the, I've got a lot of cases here. I'm going to give you a few cases, and the rest of them I will leave with you when I give you the slides. But after that, I want to go to other cases as well. Yes?
So could you kindly good faith as a point of defense?
Good faith is by itself not a defense. Good faith is part of any of those defenses. And that is
common in journalistic
yes.
process.
In fact, I already have told you about it when I spoke about malice. Malice is the opposite of good faith. So, if you do something with malice, you are not doing it in good faith. You are doing it in what is called bad faith. So, good faith is very important. It is important for all the defenses, not only one, for all the defenses. So, if you don't act in good faith, then of course, the chances of your winning are substantially reduced, because the court will draw an inference against you.
A small clarification. If something is written in good faith which becomes defamatory, will that come as a defense of a journalist, and whether the punishment, or I think the punishment will be lowered or something like that?
Yes, it is like what I was telling you yesterday. Is intention relevant? Generally speaking, no, but it becomes relevant in the assessment of damages. So if you wrote an article which was considered defamatory, the court will have regard to the fact that you wrote it in good faith and reduce the amount of damages awarded against you. So much so that in some cases, a plaintiff may win a case on a technicality. So what the court does in those circumstances is to show its displeasure or even contempt for the person who won a case on a technicality. The court will say, yes, you won it, but you know what? You're going to get 1 penny as damages. That is the most insulting thing that can happen to anybody who files a defamation case. So actually what it is he has had a Pyrrhic victory. He has won, but he gets 1 penny, 1 paisa in Indian currency. It can happen. It has happened in many cases. So yes, good faith does play a part. Okay. Now, so let's go and look at a few cases. As I said, I may skip a few cases just for reasons of time. These are cases that have come up after the Reynolds judgment came out about 20 years ago. The case here is of a local newspaper called the Leeds Weekly News, which made allegations of dishonesty and criminality about a party that provided karate classes, quite common I suppose even in this part of the world. And it was based partly on a complaint received from a member of the public. The allegations were corroborated by the official English Karate Association, which is the professional body, and was engaged as a defendant. The reporter made an attempt to contact the plaintiffs who ran a karate club in the area, but without success. So you can see this newspaper, local newspaper, got many complaints about how dishonest karate classes in that area were. So what they did was they carried out an investigation. As part of the investigation, they did first of all get the opinion of the Karate Association, which is the professional body. So the professional body supported the allegations made against karate class, certain karate providers. Then what the newspaper did was it went and tried to get a comment from one of the classes that had been implicated in this scandal. And they did not get a comment. When the case was filed, a defense of qualified privilege was upheld. In other words, the court said that in spite of the fact that the karate class in question did not comment, the newspaper was right in going ahead with the story. Why? Because there is a public interest and the newspaper had acted responsibly. Very, very important. Had acted reasonably and responsibly. Although the 10 criteria in Reynolds had not been fully satisfied, the court held that the article in question dealt with an issue of great public importance. Very, very important. Because if the same thing had been about a sexual scandal, which was of no public interest, then the court would have been less sympathetic. And the reporter, having contacted an apparently reliable official of this court's governing body, could not be faulted for making further inquiry. So he did all he could do. You cannot put a very high standard in the matter of getting the other side's story. You do what is reasonable. And the court found that in this case, the journalist had done what is reasonable. So you can see the approach taken by the court. Yes?
So, when you want to avail of qualified privilege, does the duty that you have to let the public know have to be conferred by some law or something? Because, for example, if it's a matter of public interest, something like that is like that's explosive and the public must know, and let's say a regular citizen knows of it, has verified it, is he allowed to publish it, like in terms of the duty he has to do, like the rest of citizens, or does the duty have to be conferred by some law, for example, to media professionals who are allowed to do?
There doesn't have to be any such conferment of a legal duty. That is why, if you remember in one of my previous slides, I used the phrase moral duty. So moral duty by its very nature is a duty that comes from within yourself. So you make a judgment, but your question is very important because a lot of the time, even the media act irresponsibly. And you know, they act out of self-interest. Because they know, for example, that certain scandals sell newspapers. So what they'll do is, they'll find something going on which is salacious and they'll write a story. And when they're sued for defamation, they'll take the high moral ground and say, you know what, this is a matter of public interest and I am going to use Reynolds' principles by way of defense. In which case the question is, did you have the duty to communicate this information? And that is entirely a question and answer on a case-by-case basis.
So does it become a slippery slope because anyone can say anything and try to justify it? It is not a legal duty.
No, it doesn't. I'll tell you why. It can, but it doesn't in most cases because the filter for that is the judge. Now, there is a problem. If you don't have good judges, what you say is absolutely correct. It can happen. And I will give you an example without any hesitation later today, actually, of a judge who neither knows the law of defamation nor has a command of English. So, and has yet written a judgment which is so destructive of press freedom in this country. I have no hesitation in saying that. I'll give you that case shortly. So, yes, if you don't have the right judge, if you don't have a judiciary that is enlightened, then you have a problem. Okay? Have I answered your question? Okay, let's move on. Okay, this is another case where the Reynolds defense was used. The article in this newspaper, Sunday Mirror, was about the Rugby World Cup, and it has an India connection. So what was alleged was that child labor was being used by a subcontractor. You know that footballs are sometimes made outside the country, Brazil, India, Pakistan, whatever. And like that, some of the balls were made in India, and apparently they were made by a subcontractor using slave labor in India. This is always a matter of contention because the West has a standard which not all developing countries accept. Because many countries, they argue that what you call slave labor is something that provides employment to a lot of young people. Whatever. I'm not talking the rights and wrongs of that. I'm simply telling you what the facts of the case were. Now the plaintiffs had promised to investigate the matter and they asked the paper to direct all inquiries. There's something here that triggers a boom. Okay, I'll avoid going anywhere near there. Okay. They promised to investigate the matter and asked the paper to direct all inquiries to their solicitor. The paper then contacted the subcontractor who denied, and he denied it falsely, that investigations had been initiated. A call from the paper to the second plaintiff went unanswered. So in other words, the newspaper is trying to get information from the people who are going to sue them, but without contacting the plaintiff's solicitors. And the paper published an article in the headlines, Dave Bolford breaks its promise. Now, in these circumstances, the newspaper, when they were sued, tried to use the defense of qualified privilege, of Reynolds privilege. And that defense was rejected in this case. Why? Because the allegations were very serious, and the paper did not do enough to verify the allegations. Why? Because the plaintiffs had already told them, please contact a solicitor, they'll help you, they'll give you whatever information you want. But the newspaper did not contact the solicitors. They instead went directly to subcontractor. And that was seen as taking a shortcut, which did not amount to responsible journalism. They should not have relied on the information of the subcontractor and should have contacted the plaintiff's solicitor, because subcontractor has a vested interest. Now, you can't rely on the information given only by the subcontractor. You also have to look at the issue more widely, and no harm would have been caused by delaying the publication of the story. That's the other criterion out of the 10 criteria I listed under the Reynolds principle. I'll probably skip this case, George Galloway and Sarah Hussain. McLibel, okay, this is something which may not be of very direct use to you, but what happened here was that there were two unemployed people who had a huge dislike for McDonald's, and I presume they're not alone. There are many people in the world who don't like McDonald's. But these two people were almost obsessed with their dislike for McDonald's. So what they did was, they were unemployed, they had plenty of time on their hands. They published a pamphlet in which they made all kinds of allegations against McDonald's, including some very extravagant ones. I believe the pamphlet said something like, if you eat burgers from McDonald's, you might get cancer, or something like that. In other words, they were so obsessed that they were seen as quite unbalanced in the way they put their allegations. And they distributed these pamphlets in front of McDonald's restaurants. McDonald's decided to sue them on the grounds, and this is an example of a corporation suing, on the grounds that their reputation was damaged. Now, there is no doubt that in strict legal terms that is correct, but a lot of people have argued that McDonald's was very foolish to take that course, because in a sense they drew too much attention to themselves and this case. They should simply have ignored these two people and nobody would have heard about it. This is one view. But anyway, McDonald's took what it considers to be a principled stand and filed a case. Now, this was a very amusing case because these two unemployed people were in no position to hire lawyers. There's no way they had the resources to do anything. So they decided to fight the case themselves, which is allowed, of course, as parties. So every morning they would travel to the High Court with a bag of papers, completely clueless about the law, and they didn't have the faintest idea of how to fight a case, but they still did. And the judge was very, very accommodative, helping them all the way. And on the other side, McDonald's had a battery of very expensive QCs, senior barristers. So it was an unequal fight. But anyway, they fought, and after a few days, the verdict came. And it was hardly surprising that McDonald's won, hands down. Now, the question is, what about damages? Damages were awarded several thousand pounds, which these people were in no position to pay. They didn't have the money for anything. But more than that, there's also the question of costs. In England, you do get actual costs, which can run into sometimes millions of pounds. So all that came up. Now the question was, okay, there is a rule about defamation cases, and that is that you cannot get legal aid for defamation cases, even if you're poor. In most other cases you can get legal aid, but for defamation you can't. And the two people argued that that was unfair. And so the case went to the European Court of Human Rights, as it is possible in England for these cases to do. And the question was whether the denial of legal aid was a violation of their human rights, and the court did rule in their favour and said that the UK government was required to pay them about £57,000 as a result of denial of legal aid. And the previous attempt to establish that non-availability of legal aid to liable litigants had failed. There was another case where also this argument was made before it failed, but now in this case it was established that legal aid had to be paid because of the unequal nature of the fight. Okay, what are the principles that you can discern from the Reynolds case, the post-Reynolds cases? The question of whether the journalist behaved responsibly is important to use the Reynolds defense. So if the journalist has not behaved responsibly, then they cannot win on the basis of the Reynolds defense. Now, what is responsible conduct? Of course, differs from case to case, but the court will have very great regard for that principle. And in deciding whether a journalist has a duty to publish, it is not necessary to ascertain whether he will be open to criticism if he did not publish. So you can't say, I published it because if I did not publish it, I would be criticized. That is no reason to justify publication. And only such information as is known to the journalist at the time of the publication should be considered for determining the applicability of Reynolds. In other words, you don't say, you know, I came across information after I published, which I'm going to use. That will not be allowed. And where the ultimate question of the repo charge, the question of whether the journalist was neutral in his reporting is important to establish privilege. Neutrality is a concept which is quite difficult in journalism. Can a journalist ever be completely neutral? I doubt it. Because at the end of the day, when you write, you have an inbuilt regulation. Even the use of language makes it, it's very difficult to use completely neutral language. You could achieve a degree of objectivity, but neutrality, I'm not 100% sure. But you have to be as neutral as possible. But where the journalist asserts guilt on the plaintiff's part, the defense of privilege will fail. So if you were to say that this is a question, this is a scandal which requires investigation, and that there are serious questions to be asked about the plaintiff, that's fine. But if you say the plaintiff is definitely guilty, that should not be acceptable, because that's ultimately for the court to determine, not for you. So you have to be careful when you make those kinds of statements. And the Reynolds defense may still be available to convey the most serious defamatory meaning that had been intended by the journalist, provided it was reasonable for the journalist to conclude as he had done so. Ultimately, we come back to the question of reasonableness. Reasonableness and responsibility. If those two criteria are satisfied, then the court will normally allow you to win on the basis of the Reynolds defense. And when the action is brought in respect of a foreign publication, which enjoys a limited readership in England, this has become a big issue because a lot of people like to sue in England. Particularly a lot of rich people like to sue in England. Why? Because England is seen as a plaintiff-friendly jurisdiction. It's no longer the case, but traditionally that's been the perception. But if someone sues in England, the question of responsible journalism will be judged by the professional standards that apply in the home country of publication. Very interesting, because if tomorrow one of you wrote an article which offended somebody who decided to sue you in England, then the question of how responsible your conduct is will not be determined according to English standards, but according to Indian standards, even though the case will be heard in an English court. And when the action relates to an archive maintained by a newspaper, the availability of defense privilege may depend on whether the paper had, when it came to know about changing circumstances, modified the archival copy accordingly. Now this is also very important in a general way. You know that nowadays, increasingly, almost every newspaper has got an internet edition. Now what happens is, you may publish a hard copy edition in which you say something about someone, but then subsequently you learn that what you said is not strictly correct. So what you do is you publish a correction, you publish sometimes an apology. Now the correction may be in the hard copy the next day or the day after, but have you also amended the archival copy? Very important, because if the archival copy is not amended, then that defamation continues there, and that can become an issue subsequently. And the pre-publication conduct of the defendant would be very significant to the determination of whether this defense would apply, but also the reasonableness of the plaintiff's conduct. What do I mean by this? Suppose you write an article and a person is angry with that article, he wants to sue you. So he writes a letter through his lawyers saying, I have been defamed by your article, I want to sue you. This is very common because in any case, before filing a defamation case, you have to send a legal notice. So he sends a legal notice and you as a journalist are contemptuous towards that person. You either ignore the notice or in reply, you say some very rude thing to get lost. Now if you did that and he filed a case and he has a good case, then the amount of damages awarded against you will be much higher than if you behave reasonably towards that person. So for example, if somebody points out to you that there is an error in an article you published, they are asking for nothing more. They don't want damages, they just want the error to be corrected. And then you treat them contemptuously and there is a defamation case. Obviously, the fact that you did not deal reasonably with that letter will become a matter of contention in the court case. And therefore, there is a very good reason for people to behave responsibly, reasonably, politely before litigation. But equally, this can go the other way. Suppose somebody is agitated about an article that you have written. They threaten you with a court case for defamation. You get the legal notice and you say to them, you know what, we understand you are agitated, can we please meet and discuss this matter and see if we can work a solution. And in reply, the other person says to you, get lost, see you in court. Right? There are some people who do that, sheer arrogance. If they do that and in court, if they lose the case, then the court has the discretion to award huge costs against them and in your favor. Why? Because they behaved arrogantly, they behaved unreasonably. So it can go both ways. What is the moral of all this? If you have responsibility within your publications for these matters, try to be very reasonable when any case is likely to come up. Try to deal with them politely, courteously, etc. Even if you're angry, don't show your anger in your letter. You just have to deal with them very, very courteously. Even if the person writing to you is a crackpot. And sometimes you have to deal with crackpots. It happens in life. But you have to be courteous to the extent that you can. So if you behave reasonably, then of course, there are better chances of your stand being vindicated. Any questions on any of the things I've said so far? I know that I've been talking continuously for a while. Yes?
This is about a situation wherein we take quotes from a concerned person for our stories. So
Yeah.
that quote is not always like recorded.
Yeah.
Okay. So we don't have the audio to take up the conversation, whatever conversation we will have. So in that case, if that person, kind of puts a denial post the publication of this quote, then what do we do? We just had noted down the quote as we do normally, scribbling in our pad. So what kind of evidence we do have or whether we at all have?
Okay. What you describe does not mean you're going to lose the case completely, for a start. But you will have much greater difficulty in winning the case than if you had recorded the conversation. Because you then would have full and instant proof. Now what will happen is, there will be a question of whether the court should believe you or the other person, the person who gave you the quote. Now, up to a point, making of contemporaneous notes is very, very useful. Now, everything depends on how good the judge is. Because in this country, these cases are decided by judges. Now, a judge will assess your credibility against the other persons. So, if the judge is satisfied that you, first of all, took down notes contemporaneously, sometimes this becomes a big dispute and becomes satellite litigation, or at least it becomes a sideshow. And what then happens is that forensic experts are called to find out when the notes were made, because the other person may say this person only made the notes one day before the trial began. So that can happen. But I would still say keeping of notes is very, very useful. Ideally, as I was saying earlier, you should get the information on paper, on tape, before you publish. Do not wait for the information to be given to you after you publish. Even if the person you're dealing with is reliable. Now, it may be that somebody comes up and gives you information and says, don't worry, I will give you the proof in a few days' time. Don't take their word for it. Not because they are untrustworthy, it's simply because human nature being what it is. Sometimes it can lead to disaster. So it is better always to have full proof. And of course, if it's a conversation, then to have at least a recording of that conversation. Now that by itself raises a number of legal questions which I will not answer now, but I'll talk when I talk about the right to privacy. Is it legal to record somebody's conversation? Okay, I'll talk about that later. Okay, any other questions? Yeah.
With respect to the element of neutrality in reportage, say in India, for instance, there are strong undercurrents in media houses about the political affiliations, right? So, for instance, it's informally very well known that the Hindu has a left liberal orientation or the NDTV has a certain orientation. I'm pretty sure in UK as well, the same, it works the same way.
Absolutely.
So, in that case, how relevant is neutrality of reportage, and does the court take into consideration this informal but very strong undercurrent of political affiliations of the media houses?
Okay, again, I'm very sorry to disappoint you, but what you raised, however important, it is important, falls largely in the area of ethics rather than law. But there's a small part of what you raised which can be dealt with under law, and that is, you asked towards the end of your question, what view will the court take? The short answer to that question is, the court will not have regard to that aspect of the matter unless it is very relevant to the actual content of the comment. Generally speaking, it doesn't matter, because ultimately you are going to be judged by whether what you said is defamatory or not. Obviously, to some extent, the context matters, but not really in a big way. Where it does become relevant is in situations where the ethics of the profession come in. So, for example, a case which goes before the regulatory bodies like the Press Complaints Commission, or now we call it IPSO, Independent Press Standards Organization. Now, they will have regard to such matters, but generally speaking, in the court of law, it doesn't matter. Okay? Right, anything else? No, in which case, let's move on. Okay, I'm just going to skip this for practical purposes. Reynolds was also dealt with in another case called Jamil. Very important, and some further advances were made on Reynolds. So what the court did in Jamil was to expand media freedom a little bit by allowing a few more questions to be asked. Is the matter one of public interest? And if so, is the inclusion of the defamatory matter justified? Was the publication just and fair? Was the tone of the article moderate? In some respects, these questions are covered by the Reynolds principles themselves, but there has been an expansion, and there is a greater room for editorial judgment. In other words, the court will not second guess the judgment made by the editor as far as possible. But of course, the Reynolds defense was formally abolished by this law, which is now the law in England. But as I keep telling you, the Reynolds defense still has a relevance for India. So don't ignore that aspect of the matter. Okay, I'm going to completely skip this slide because this has to do with English law only, doesn't apply to India, so I'll leave that there. I'm now going to deal with a few cases, some of which are Indian cases. So I start with Takassin Karandia, which the law students here, of course, will have known about, so another occasion when you can switch off if you like. Now, what is this case about? This is probably the first really important defamation case heard in India. Takassi was a prominent industrialist based in Bombay. The case was heard incidentally in Bombay by the Bombay High Court. And Karandia was the editor of a tabloid newspaper called Blitz, which is now defunct. the allegations were that Takasi was not a very principled businessman, that he was guilty of many things, foreign exchange violations, racketeering, racketeering not in the mob sense of the term, but in terms of irregular business practices, etc., and seeking all kinds of questionable favors from the government. Takasi was also at that time the chairman of what was called the Textile Control Board, and he owned many mills in which cloth was produced. And the allegation was that he misused his position as chairman of the Textile Control Board. So lots of allegations made, and the totality of the allegations was such that Mr. Takasi felt he had been grossly defamed, and because he had deep pockets, he decided to file a defamation case. And the case was one of the most prominent cases to be heard in the Bombay High Court. The hearings went on, I think, for 102 days, which in those days was considered a record. Today, 102 days is super fast justice in India. But anyway, this is what happened. And the long and short of it, because I don't have time to go too deep into this case, was that Mr. Karandia tried to defend his articles using truth, fair comment, and qualified privilege. Now, he could not succeed on truth because he could not prove the truth of some of the allegations. Now remember, in a defamation case, the defendant has to prove the truth, not the plaintiff saying the allegations are false. So he could not prove the truth of the allegations, so he failed on that defense. On the defense of fair comment, also he failed because the comment was not seen to be fair in some cases. Secondly, if the facts themselves are not true, then you can't use fair comment as your defense. Remember, I was telling you, fair comment is only available for facts which are true. He also failed on qualified privilege because Mr. Takasi was able to show that Karandia was actuated by malice. So remember, malice defeats qualified privilege. So Mr. Karandia's attempt to show that this is a matter of public interest, that there's a duty for my readers to know about the bad behavior of Takasi, etc., failed. So he lost on all three. And Takasi was awarded damages of 300,000 rupees, 3 lakh rupees, which at that time was a record amount. And it's quite a big amount. The case is in the 1960s. And then the case went in appeal. And in the appeal, Mr. Karandia decided, or his lawyers decided very wisely, not to pursue the points about truth and fair comment, and confine their attack to qualified privilege. But a lot of material came out in the evidence which showed that Mr. Karandia was harboring a grudge against Mr. Takasi because a number of articles published by Blitz newspaper previously resulted in a criminal case being filed against Blitz, for which Blitz had to apologize in a manner that was little short of groveling. And so that rankled with Mr. Karandia, and that came out in the evidence. And therefore, the appeal also failed on the issue of qualified privilege. The only redeeming feature for Mr. Karandia was that the amount of damages was reduced by half. So it became 150,000 rupees, 1.5 lakhs, which still was a large amount at that time. So that's what the Takasi and Karandia case was all about. I've given you a very, very brief summary. Actually, it's more fascinating than if you're interested, read the law reports. There's a lot of stuff there, very, very good. Particularly our law students, very, very useful. And I'll tell you this, at that time, the Indian courts used to deal with these cases much better than they do now. So the judgment, particularly the appeal judgment, which is available online, actually discusses many of these principles at great length. It also deals with a number of very good cases, including English cases, because as you know, Indian law definition based on English law. And therefore, there's a wealth of material there, the law students in particular, for you to be able to appreciate the full flavor of this case. Simi Grewal and T.M. Ramchandran. Now, I presume you know who is Simi Grewal. I suspect you do not know who is T.M. Ramchandran, or who was T.M. Ramchandran. He is dead. Now, this was in relation to a magazine called Film World, which is also defunct. And the case concerned a movie called Siddharth. And Siddharth was based on the novel, written by Hermann Hesse. And Ms. Grewal had acted in this movie as a lead female actor. It required her to pose in very few clothes with certain jewelry placed on strategic parts of her body. That's how she was portrayed in the movie. Now, she acted, the movie was due to be released, at which point the producers, I think, decided to send some still photographs from the movie to this magazine, Film World. You know how it is before the movie is released. Producers like to get pre-release publicity for the movie. And not surprisingly, producers usually send the most salacious pictures to attract public attention. So that's what the producers did. And Film World was happy to carry those pictures because it also helped the circulation of the magazine. So it's a good cozy arrangement between the two of them. Except that Ms. Grewal became a bit hot under the collar at this stage and said that the still picture should not be published on the grounds that she would be defamed. Now, she filed a case in the Bombay High Court. Can I ask you, what do you think? Would she have a case? Sorry? Who is it? Speak up. I can hear a whisper. Yeah.
I think she would have a case.
She would have a case. Okay. How?
So, even though those scenes were from the movie,
Yeah.
in the entire movie there could have been a context to it. So, I mean, owing to some like storyline or something, it might have been shot that way. But when you're just sending the still, then it shows her in a way which she might not be agreeable to, and at that point of time that might have been considered to be like bad for her reputation.
Okay. Anybody has a different view?
You said it's really with
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Because if she has agreed to posing in that particular fashion for the movie, I'm sure she had like the consciousness that this would be used in other places as well, maybe for the movie poster or for publication, which is for any other movie, like this is for normally any movie, so she can't have places.
Okay. Anybody else with any view?
But I guess the whole thing depends on the kind of contract she would have had with the producer or maybe the.
Okay. What do you have in mind?
The contract, I mean, I don't know the kind of contract they signed with the producer.
Yeah.
But that would also mean the usage of photographs for publicity or something like that. So
You're absolutely right, that happens. But how does it become defamation?
and that is again her viewpoint.
Yeah.
If it is not within the contract that those photographs or whatever can be used anywhere and everywhere,
Yeah.
then she has a point.
Okay. But she has a point not about defamation. Does she have a point about defamation?
If it, injury to her feelings, does that include?
No, not injury to her feelings. No. Yeah.
So the thing is, considering the kind of like picture we're talking about, I mean, in the movie it would be in a certain context. So I feel like if you're publishing a picture, which is an isolated like picture of her in very few clothes, it may be looked at it differently than it would be in a movie where there's a context to it and when there is certain like some events in that movie lead up to that. So I think the perception would be different. So in case she would be able to prove that this isolated picture is interpreted in a way which is different from the movie A, and definitely then I think she will understand.
So you're sort of supporting what was said a few minutes ago, yeah? Okay. Any other view? Actually, oddly enough, the view expressed on this side is correct. And I'll tell you, there's one thing I forgot to tell you when I discussed defenses. There's one more defense, which is rarely used, but it is still a defense, and that is the defense of what is called consent. So if a person consents to the publication of something that is defamatory, then they can't complain about it afterwards. Now, generally speaking, you wouldn't expect somebody to consent to publishing something defamatory about themselves, would you? It sounds ridiculous, but it happens in real life. I'll give an example, or at least a context in which it happens. You know that a lot of celebrities like to brag about themselves, and when they brag, they sometimes go overboard without realizing the implications of what happens when what they brag about is published. So they talk with a very loose tongue sometimes after having had a liquid lunch to journalists, and the journalists then reproduce it, and when they see it in cold print, they begin to get upset and they try to sue. At which point, the journalist, if he's shrewd, would have recorded it on tape and will tell the court, I'm doing nothing except reproducing what the fellow told me. In which case, the defense of consent would succeed. So, in this particular case as well, consent was used as one of the defenses by Mr. Ramchandran, and it succeeded. Now, the point you made is also relevant. In fact, actually, Ms. Grewal's lawyers tried to use that kind of argument. What they tried to say was, there was an agreement between her and the German producers of the movie that the stills which are shown in film world will not be shown in India. They'll be shown outside, because she said Indian audiences don't like that kind of exposure or behavior, and therefore therefore the picture should not be shown. Now, that is not a problem of defamation. It's a problem of breach of contract. Very likely, Ms. Grewal would have succeeded on a breach of contract case, but not a defamation case. So that's a difference that happened. So the long and short of it was that Mr. Ramchandran and Phil World won this case. So it's a case of consent. Now, there's another case which is also similar, and then you have, incidentally, it is possible to argue, if you're a cynic, that these kind of cases are filed not with an objective of winning, but of generating more publicity for the movie. Okay, so keep that in mind. It's a small price to pay to go to court and generate enough publicity for a movie.
So, just add one question. So, even though this was not the case here, like is it but is it possible to take this contextual argument in a way that, from the example you gave yesterday of a person who is known to be a vegetarian going to some non-vegetarian shop for eating, so if that can be defamatory.
No, sorry, I didn't say going to a non-vegetarian shop. I didn't say that at all. No. That will not be defamation at all. I gave the example of an advertisement for sausages.
Yeah, so but even then, like suppose a person like was shooting for a documentary and he was like holding a sausage this thing and then say that yeah, this is so bad. Now that had a context. But now if I take a still from it and publish it, then the context becomes very different, right? And that picture, that still can be defamatory to this person.
Repeat the facts I've not understood. You're talking about a vegetarian person.
Undertaking to like act in a documentary or like of that sort, which says like in which he holds a pack of like sausages and criticizes it. So now if I take that still of him holding the pack of sausages and use it in a different context, then that can be defamation, right?
Without the comment.
Without the comment, yeah.
Well,
then that
okay.
can be defamation, right?
It can, in certain circumstances, unless there is something indicated in the write-up that accompanies the picture, which gives explanations about what is happening. But you're right, if simply that still was shown, there is a possible case of defamation.
So, can't we draw the same like analogy with this case that maybe Srilanka had consented to shooting in those clothes, but that was only done in a context. Like I don't know what the context of the movie was, but suppose for a film like Fire, which had a lot of scenes that would be considered salacious, but it had a context to it. Now, I can obviously argue that since Shabana had like consented to shooting those scenes, she had consented. But if I take stills from Fire and like portrays it as a like salacious movie, then that becomes defamatory for Shabana Azmi, right? To some extent.
No, because any reasonable person would understand how these stills are used from movies. There's a clear assumption that there is a context which cannot be shown in the stills. Normally, these stills are accompanied by a write-up. It's exactly what happened in Film World. It was not just the picture there, there was a big write-up in which there was a lot of explanation. And also remember, this is connected directly to the book. So, a lot of readers will be, the attention of a lot of readers will be drawn to the book. So, if you take the totality of it, it will be very difficult to argue that she has been defamed. Okay? Right, sorry.
So regarding the defense of consent, cannot it be like taken in the sense of context itself? Like she had agreed like to this to be done as a part of movie. She was aware that it could be used later in such and such manner, but mere knowledge of that happening doesn't affect necessarily as films.
It does. Because it would be very foolish for a film actor, she's a person who has established herself in, even at that time had established herself in the industry for a very long time, to argue that she did not imagine that stills from a movie that is to be released would come out. No, that doesn't sound at all credible. So that defense will very easily fail. Now, if they had morphed the pictures to make them more salacious, she would have a case. They simply reproduced the pictures as they were, along with a number of other pictures which showed her in a different pose. So, taken together, the chances of her winning were very small. In fact, almost non-existent. Okay? Right, now let's move on and look at this case, Morarji Desai and Simo Harsh. Again, I assume that you know who Morarji Desai was. Does anybody know who is Simo Harsh? He's still alive? Any idea? No? Okay, he is a very well-known American journalist. Well-known but not in Calcutta, but well-known at least in America and other parts of the world. Now, he's also a person who has won many Pulitzer Prizes, so if you like, a decorated journalist, not just a well-known but also a decorated journalist. He was particularly famous for his expose of American conduct during the Vietnam War. That was his big journalistic achievement. Now, he was, like many such journalists, very left-wing, and therefore had very little love for Henry Kissinger, who at the time was the Secretary of State in the United States. He wrote a book which was a hatchet job on Henry Kissinger. His target was Henry Kissinger. And the name of the book was The Price of Power. And as part of his, it's quite a big book, quite a thick book, as part of his investigation into the activities of Henry Kissinger, he said something about Indian politics. So this has a direct Indian connection. And what he said was this, or one of the things he said was this, that there was in the Indian cabinet a minister who was a paid informer for the CIA. Okay, now that allegation by itself should not come to you as a surprise, because as you know, the CIA has been made the villain in India for many things, including sometimes the late arrival of the monsoon, the late running of trains, the poor performance of the Indian cricket team, etc., etc. If you can't find anybody else to blame, blame the CIA. Anyway, the allegation here was more serious. What Seymour Hersh was saying was that this cabinet minister used to pass on information to the CIA about matters discussed in the Indian cabinet. Very serious allegation to me. In other words, he was a traitor to the country. And Seymour Hersh described this politician the following way. He named the politician as Morarji Desai. And his basis for describing Mr. Desai was that, or the way he described him after giving his name was that he was the former Finance Minister of India, the former Chief Minister of Bombay, not Maharashtra, Bombay, and the Deputy Prime Minister of India. These were three positions that the slightly older among you will realize were held by Mr. Desai. So in all those respects, Mr. Hersh was accurate in describing Mr. Desai. Actually, he made a fatal mistake, and that was that he had confused Mr. Desai with one other politician who held all those three positions in the Indian state. So the book was published. Mr. Desai was extremely upset. He said, "I'm going to sue for defamation because my honor is very important to me." And I think even those of you who may not necessarily be fans of Mr. Desai would probably agree that he was known for his patriotism, his love for his country. So he said, "This is a terrible attack on my integrity, so I'm going to sue." Now, he had to make a choice because the book was published both in the US and in India. So, where do you sue? His lawyers advised him to sue in both countries. So, he went ahead and the case was filed first in the United States. Then probably the book had a wider circulation than in India. And when the case was filed in the United States, it was instantly dismissed. Do you know why? Can you guess why? And I've not told you the legal rule, so I just want you to think about it.
Desai was a citizen of US.
Mr. Desai was?
Not citizen of US.
No. You don't have to be a citizen of the United States to file a case there, right? It is because the US law on defamation is very strict. It does not allow public figures to sue for defamation. So if you are a public figure, you cannot file a defamation case unless you showed that the person defaming you or the person alleged to be defaming you had actual malice towards you, which is a very difficult thing to show. And even Mr. Desai accepted that Seymour Hersh did not have actual malice towards him. In fact, they hardly knew each other. So Mr. Desai's case was thrown out straight away when it was filed in the US. But then the Indian case was allowed to go ahead, and this case was filed in the Bombay High Court. Now, Mr. Desai's lawyers argued that the book should be stopped from being published in India, being circulated in India, because by then it had been published. So what the lawyers for Mr. Desai wanted to do was to get an injunction against the book being circulated only within India. And that's all the Indian courts can do. So they applied for the injunction, and there was a hearing at which the lawyers for the publishers argued that they are going to prove the truth of the allegation. In other words, that what Mr. Hersh has said was true. Now, when truth is sought to be pleaded, there is a rule in defamation law which says a court cannot give an injunction because they will prove the truth. If you stop a book which essentially is telling the truth, you're causing a lot of harm to the sale of the book. So the Indian courts refused Mr. Desai an injunction. Now, the sad part of this case is that on the merits, as I told you, because Mr. Hersh made a serious blunder Mr. Desai would have won the case, because Mr. Harsh could not have proven that Morarji Desai was the paid informer for the CIA. So he would have won the case. Mr. Desai would have won the case. But unfortunately, he never had the opportunity to win the case. Why? Because of the delays in the Indian legal system. Before the case could come up for hearing, Mr. Desai died. Because remember, even at that time, Mr. Desai must have been in his late 70s or 80s. And then in India, it takes many years for a case to come up for hearing. So this is an example of how delay defeats justice. And the case obviously died with Mr. Desai. So nothing happened to the publishers or to Mr. Harsh. The book is still in circulation. If you are interested, you can buy it. You can buy it online for a fraction of the price for which it was sold initially, and you'll still find that allegation in a footnote. Now, I have a question, just to test your general knowledge. Who do you think was the other personality who shared the same characteristics in terms of positions held as Mr. Desai? A person who held the posts of Deputy Prime Minister of India, Finance Minister of India, Chief Minister of Bombay.
Patel.
Beg your pardon?
Patel.
Patel. Patel. Which Patel? Vallabhbhai Patel. No. No.
Why Chavan?
Absolutely right. Yes. Yeah. So there you are. Even Pulitzer Prize winning journalists can make such trivial mistakes. Trivial but serious mistakes. So there you go. That's the case of Morarji Desai and.
So did he clarify later that they made that mistake and mistake?
I don't know honestly. I have not seen any public acknowledgement of that fact, or much less an apology. Jeffrey Archer and the Star. I'm sure you know who Jeffrey Archer is. The Star, of course, is a newspaper. Now, I suspect some of you know about this case. Do you? Anybody here knows about this case? Quite an interesting case. This was an English case which involved Mr. Archer, who, as you know, is a well-known novelist and also, until a few years ago, well-known and very ambitious politician in the United Kingdom. He became, among other things, the deputy chairman of the Conservative Party. Now, what happened with Mr. Archer was that there was for a long time a suspicion that for all his public affirmations of admiration for his wife, he was not exactly faithful to her. And this is something the newspapers knew about for a long time. And they suspected him in particular to be carrying on an affair with a certain named person. On one occasion, the newspapers got information that Mr. Archer had slept with a prostitute. And they obviously, you know, our tabloids in the UK are quite dogged, and they are quite willing to go to great lengths to publish these kinds of stories. So they got as much information as they could, and they decided to entrap Mr. Archer. Entrap probably is not the right word, but at least to expose him on the basis of a sting operation, which was duly conducted. Money changed hands. Basically what they were trying to say was that Mr. Archer was about to pay the lady in question a certain sum of money for her to go on holiday and be away from Britain for some time so that the whole scandal would die down. That was duly publicized in the newspaper. And when it was published, when the story was published, Mr. Archer decided to sue for defamation. And his argument was that the newspaper was saying something false about his activities in relation to that particular lady. The trial took place amid great fanfare in London. His wife was called as a witness. The trial went on for many days. It was a media sensation. And of course, at that time, most of these cases were heard by a jury. Now it's less so. Nowadays, jury trials for defamation are becoming rare in England. But those days it used to be quite common. So the jury heard the case, and many people came and gave evidence, as I said, including his wife, who praised him to the skies. And the judge gave a summing up to the jury, which many people thought was unduly generous to Jeffrey Archer. The result was that the jury accepted Jeffrey Archer's version of his story and said that the newspaper had defamed him. And the court awarded a sum of £500,000 by way of damages. That is damages. And the costs were even more. So the newspaper had to suffer a very big loss as a result of this case. Now, that was seen at that time to be a bit of a record in terms of damages, etc. But the media still had very strong suspicions that Mr. Archer was not telling the truth. So they continued the investigations, and interestingly, many years later, 14 years later, there was another case related to this case, which was interesting because what Mr. Archer had done during his trial for defamation was he had told a friend to lie on oath. So he had told the friend to give an affidavit in which the friend had sworn that on the day and at the time that Jeffrey Archer had been alleged to be with a prostitute, he was actually having dinner with his friend. In other words, an alibi. You know what an alibi is in legal terms. Now, that affidavit was actually not used in court. And yet, it is a serious matter. If you say something in an affidavit, then you have to say the truth. You can't lie on an affidavit. Lying on an affidavit involves serious criminal charges. Now, interestingly, between the time of the end of this case, when Jeffrey Archer got £500,000, and a few years later, his friend had become his ex-friend. As a result, this friend went to the police and told the police, you know what, a few years ago, Mr. Archer, my then friend, had asked me to sign an affidavit, which I signed. I am now willing to confess that what I said in that affidavit is false. When that happened, the police immediately got into the act and said we have to investigate the matter. And they began an investigation. They decided to charge Jeffrey Archer with perjury under criminal law. Perjury is a very serious offense. And so they gave him an opportunity of defending himself in the perjury trial, which he did with expensive lawyers. And it became very clear that he had no defense. So he lost the perjury case. The immediate result was that he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. And the British system, for all its faults, is quite relentless in its pursuit of people who lie on oath. And Mr. Archer was made to pay a price for his lying on oath 14 years after he had lied. So in 2001, he was sent to jail. And the other effect of this perjury trial was that the newspaper decided to reclaim its money. Because remember, it had spent £500,000 by way of damages and a much larger sum by way of costs, which it wanted to recover. So the newspaper went to court and said, the whole basis on which we were required to pay the money has been shown to be unfounded, and therefore we need our money back. And we need our money back with interest. So Jeffrey Archer was required by the court to give the newspaper 2.2 million pounds. Of course, the interest rate in the UK is much lower than here. If it happened in India, it would be a very significant sum, much bigger than 2.2 million. And they therefore, Mr. Archer therefore paid that money. He also had to pay the newspaper's costs. So you can see how sometimes a defamation case can also get mixed up with a criminal case for perjury. But it is something which vindicates the stand of newspapers.
So what happened to his friend or ex-friend?
Okay, he confessed to the crime. So technically,
He lied or no?
sorry, yeah,
He lied or
yeah.
no?
So technically, he's also guilty, except that in the context of the case, after assessing all these circumstances, he was not sent to jail. I can't remember whether he was fined. He was obviously told that what he did was wrong. Yeah, but I don't think there were serious consequences because I can't remember the exact details. This happened many years ago. No. There was some mitigating circumstance which he was able to show to the court, as a result of which he did not suffer anything more than probably a reprimand from the court. But he accepted. He said, "Look, I did something wrong. I accept it, and therefore I'm willing to pay the price for that." So there you go. Okay, so that's the Jeffrey Archer case. Any questions? Okay, I see that we're coming very close to the end of our time. Just give me a minute or two. I'll just go through. Okay, I'll tell you what. This is almost the last bit I want to talk about. This case I don't want to spend any time on. Just to tell you that this is the case in which the principle was laid under American law that if you are a public figure, you cannot sue for defamation except if you can show that the person who you accuse defaming you did it with malice. So quite an important case in those circumstances. Actually, Uma Quran I'm going to leave aside for the time being. I want to talk about the PB Sawant case. Very important. Very, very important. Okay? If you're there with me, will our friends be able to stay on for another 5 to 10 minutes? It's a very important case. Okay. And if you know what the case is all about, so I won't spend too much time describing the facts. Essentially, you know that there was a provident fund scam in this country. In the state, I think of Uttar Pradesh, I may be wrong, and it involved some judges, including at least one High Court judge who was called Samanta, P.K. Samanta, I think. Now, Times Now is, as you know, a channel that is quite loud, quite prominent, and at the time, the program in question was being anchored by a person who I'm sure excites huge feelings amongst all of you, Mr. Goswami. Now, what happened there was that as part of the program, there was a news item which focused on the Provident Fund scam. And as part of that item, there was a picture shown on screen of a judge, which turned out to be P.B. Sawant, flashing. You know how it is with these news items. But the text said P.K. Samanta implicated in the PF scandal, etc. I believe that the duration for which the photo flash was 15 seconds. Now, when the photo of P.B. Sawant flashed, now P.B. Sawant incidentally is a completely clean judge. He has absolutely nothing, no involvement with any of these scandals. He was a judge in the Bombay High Court, he became a judge of the Supreme Court, he then became chairman of the Press Council of India. Those are his achievements. Now, when the photo flashed, Sawant did not see the item at all. His ex-secretary, sitting somewhere else, probably in a different city, saw it and immediately phoned his ex-boss and said, "Sir, your photo has been flashing in the context of the PF scam." At which point, Sawant told his secretary, "Why don't you phone the news channel and bring it to their attention, ask them to stop showing my photo," which he did. And the channel apparently stopped showing that picture straight away as soon as they got the call. Now, from here the story gets a bit murky. Mr. Sawant insisted that the channel publish an apology, and I think he insisted on being a cringing apology. Anyway, the channel did carry on the scroll a very clear statement that they were wrong in showing P.V. Sawant's picture, whereas the actual judge was P.K. Samantha. They showed that, and apparently the scroll went on for a long time. For how long, I don't know. Now, Mr. Sawant was not satisfied with that. He also wanted a personal apology. He wanted, first of all, an apology on screen, and then he wanted a personal apology. So he sent a threatening notice, straight away demanding 50 crores for the defamation first, and all kinds of threats. Mr. Goswami, you would say rarely, given his personality, agreed to meet Mr. Sawant and apologize in person. Mr. Sawant was living in Pune. Mr. Goswami was based in Bombay. So he said, I'll come to your home and apologize. A date was fixed, a time was fixed. And it turns out, and again, I'm not sure about the veracity, but I'm just telling you what I read. Just before the date on which Sawant was, or on which Goswami was to meet Sawant, Goswami sent communication to Sawant saying, I'm terribly sorry, I can't turn up on that day because I have some medical surgery being arranged for that day, so we'll have to rearrange the time when I come and apologize. Mr. Sawant was even more angry. He sent another threatening notice and said, you know what, now you'll have to pay me 100 crores. And again, all kinds of further threats. And Mr. Sawant says, again, I'm going only by what I read, that he discovered that the date and time at which Goswami was to meet him, Goswami was actually in Bombay. He was not undergoing surgery or anything like that. I don't know whether it's true or not. Anyway, it became an ego issue. And despite all the offers by the Times Group to apologize, etc., Mr. Sawant said nothing doing, I'm going to see you in court. And he duly filed the case in the Pune District Court. Now, there is a lot of controversy about that because I don't have time to go into it, but normally you will file a case in the place where the defendant lives, not the place where you live. But anyway, doesn't matter. He filed a case. The case was heard by a judge called Mrs. Deshmukh. What she did was, and what is also remarkable, and I will only say this, what is remarkable is that this case was heard ultra fast. Very, these kinds of cases normally take many, many years. This was heard in a matter of months. And extremely bizarrely, this judge immediately awarded the 100 crores. Right? So it's a case of, I suppose, if I were to caricature it, the plaintiff coming to court, sir, how much do you want? 100 crores? Okay, there you go, have it. Absolutely astounding. Absolutely astounding. On the question of the quantum of damages, I will go so far as to say that even if the plaintiff was Mother Teresa, she could not have got 100 crores. Unprecedented, totally impossible. And what is worse, when the Times Group appealed the verdict, which they can go to the High Court, they can go to the Supreme Court, they were required to deposit 20 crores, which Justice Sawant was at liberty to withdraw. He could take out those 20 crores, keep it with him, till the appeal was heard. And in India, you know how it is. The appeal will take its own time. I don't know how many years. Justice Sawant at that time was 70 plus years. I wish him a long life, but given human mortality, I don't know if he will be around to see the end of the appeal. What happens to the 20 crores that has already been taken out? Also, Times Group had to give a bank guarantee for the remaining 80 crores. I find this, quite frankly, absolutely astounding and also a grave threat to freedom of expression, to the media. If you have people like these misusing the law of defamation, and in one sense I can't blame Justice Sawant alone, because it is more the fault of the judge. And I took the trouble of reading the so-called judgment, and I tell you, this judge has absolutely no conception of the law of defamation. I say this with full responsibility. I know what I'm saying is being recorded, because it was very difficult to recognize well-known principles of defamation in the judgment. And what is worse, the judgment is unintelligible in parts because of the judge's extremely poor command of the language. So there we are. I mean, it is very sad for the Indian media if you have judgments like this. So that is what the Southern case is all about. It's not technically the end of the case because you still have to wait for the appeal to be heard. So we'll see if and when that happens. Any questions?
20 crore he has withdrawn.
I don't know whether he's withdrawn. He is at liberty to withdraw. The only other thing I need to say is that I saw a statement somewhere in the media, I don't know whether it's true, that he has made a vague promise of, the statement was like this. He said apparently, I am not suing for the money, but I am suing for a matter of principle or something like that. And that apparently intended to give the money or part of the money to charity. Now, I don't know whether that has happened or whether that is going to happen. Having said all that, I still repeat what I said before, namely that Justice Samant is a clean man. So there is no question of him being dishonest in relation to any of the charges that were made. But it is still a matter of very great worry for the Indian media. Because 100 crores, actually at that time, I think when we converted into foreign exchange, was about $20 million or something like that, which is a huge sum of money, which even foreign courts are very reluctant to award. And it's a matter of luck that the defendant was the Times Group. Just imagine if it was a small newspaper company, it should have been bankrupted. There's no question about that. So there
They
we
have
are.
not gone that far. They could have panicked and they could have gone and they could have apologized and the matter would have ended.
I'm not sure about that because they tried to. I mean, I don't want to brief for the Times Group. I'm simply telling you what I read. And I got the impression that they did everything reasonable. Quite frankly, look, 15 minutes, 15 seconds
Because
of
they made a
flashing.
mistake to bring out the picture from the library.
That is exactly what happened. It's a database. It's a computerized database. Somebody has keyed in wrongly. You know, when they type. There is negligence. I don't deny that. But 100 crores, first of all, even demanding 100 crores, according to me, is a threat to freedom of the press.
That to buy a former chairman of the press
That's
council.
exactly. Yeah. So I'm very, very disappointed and very saddened by this particular case. So there we are. Anyway, okay. Any other questions? I don't want to detain you anymore. We will stop here if you don't have any questions, and I'll meet you again tomorrow morning for a different topic. Thank you.